on Meet the Press in 2007 while he was running for president. One of the things my political advisors say to me is, whoa, don't touch that third rail. So he was proud of the fact that he was all over the third rail in 2007, just as he'd been during the 1990s. Within this year's presidential contest,
Hi, Susan. Hi, Dale. Hi, Jim. Hi, Dolores. I'll be with you in just a minute. I'm sharing to a few places. Please share for me as well. Thanks. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm with you now, having completed my sharing. Hi, Dale. Hi, Susan. And Evelina. Hello. And Dolores, Susan Beaver, Steve Wolfbrand. Thank you all for coming. Please share for me. I hope you're doing well tonight. I certainly am. Steve Wolfbrand. Hi, Steve. How you doing? Okay, so tonight I really have the feeling, after watching things over the weekend, that Bernie has been building tremendous momentum in Iowa and in New Hampshire. And I just have this really, really good feeling based on the enthusiasm of the people who are coming to his talks and his town halls, okay, and his rallies. And I'm thinking, there's no way anybody is going to beat Bernie in these first two states. It's just going to happen. I know we're on the eve of the impeachment hearings, and of course, I'm very well aware of the idea that these impeachment hearings uh, happen to occur just at the time they're occurring in order to pull Bernie and Warren off the campaign trail and favor Buttigieg and also Joe Biden. Hi, Russ, and hi, Bonnie. Great to see you. But although I'm sure some of this is part of the process right now, and we have to view it in a serious way, hi, Kay, I still think that tactics like this are not going to succeed, that Bernie has actually planned well for this, has built a tremendous amount of support for himself in both of the first two states. I'm pretty sure the campaign has a plan in place for surrogates, for bringing surrogates in who can run extremely good meetings and be very, very compelling and very enthusiastic. I was happy to see Naomi Klein there over the weekend, and John Cusack there also, and they were really something. And a variety of other people supporting him. And of course, he flew out to Iowa today to receive to have a campaign event out there and to receive the formal endorsement of by Congressman Pramila Jayapal. Very, very important endorsement. The two Medicare for All authors are together now, and she is in very strong support. And Bernie has been compiling endorsements up the wazoo lately, just up the wazoo, and the momentum building, I think, in back of his campaign is really tremendous. Now, I don't know what plans they have to have him Skype into to Iowa or to Skype into some of the other states. Okay, I do believe that he'll be able to steal away for some events in New Hampshire and in South Carolina, because the plane ride from D.C. to both of those places is fairly short. It's not like flying to Iowa. Okay, Iowa is very hard to get when you have to go back into the Senate for a hearing the day after. But okay, I think that Bernie may still be able to get to New Hampshire for certain events and South Carolina for certain events. And if they can make arrangements that he can basically Skype in to be at some of these events and address those events, and he can have his surrogates there Okay. As well, I think he can still generate considerable enthusiasm at the various events, okay, that are going to go on. Now, I want to go over some of the articles that have appeared, uh, and I've linked to them. I'll read from them, but not through them. First of all, there was an outstanding piece at Jacobin a few days back. Uh, Actually, it was on December 20th, 2019, and it was by Megan Day and Matt Karp. Now, I didn't cover it actually back then, but I still thought it was worth covering now. And I think it's really a great piece. And its title is Bernie is the candidate who can beat Trump. Here's why. And I thought this was a very, very compelling piece. If you haven't seen it, I certainly recommend that you do take the time out to read this piece. There are a number of very, very good things which are said. It starts off by contrasting how people feel about the Bernie campaign, okay, and Bernie in terms of his stance on the issues and their gut feelings about them. He is the most popular candidate among the Democrats from the standpoint of everything except from the electability standpoint, where there are still many people who feel, uh, for reasons which are not entirely clear, that somehow Joe Biden is still the more likely of the two to win when running against Donald Trump. But as they in CARP say, this primary season, anxious Democrats should trust their guts. It turns out that the candidate they like best, Bernie Sanders, is also the candidate with the best chance to knock Trump out of the White House. I entirely agree with that, of course. But to go on with a short quote came from them, while every other general election matchup seems likely to descend into the bleak and muddled culture clash of 2016, the contest between Sanders and Trump would actually present American voters with a stark choice. The populist who wants to win you health care and cancel your debt, or the rich prick who doesn't care if you live or you die, so long as your boss gets paid. And they go on, Trump's true electoral weakness is not his loudishness, his congenital, his lying, or even his personal corruption. It's his function as a tool of the rich man's Republican Party and his blatant disinterest in making life better for the vast majority of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. And the article goes on making some very, very good points. It has a number of sections. Here's another key quote. The real kicker is that the 206 counties that went for Obama in 2008 and 2012 in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And then Trump in 2016, Sanders has outraised all of his competitors by a long shot. By September 2019, he had pulled in 81,841 individual contributions from 33,185 donors in these flipped counties. That's roughly 3 times as many as Biden, Warren, or Mayor Pete Buttigieg. And they cited that to show that Bernie has strong grassroots support in those places. And they go into the story of how Trump was able to woo and win with these particular voters in 2016. And then they point out that despite his residual popularity among Democrats stemming from the Obama years, now fading fast, Joe Biden is not able to deliver the message that needs to be delivered to these people. That, in other words, Joe Biden cannot be a populist. Why? Because he opposes strong measures to tax the ultra rich. It is no coincidence he has more billionaire donors than any candidate in the race, they say, Trump included. Worst of all, Biden has no credibility as an economic populist. He has devoted much of his political life to supporting free trade, including NAFTA, the TPP, and uh, the permanent normal trade relations with China. In a general election, Biden's long record as a friend to banks and outsourcing uh, the businesses, not to mention his son's service on the board of a Ukrainian gas company, will surely suffocate any Democratic attempt to battle Trump on economic grounds. I believe this too, that this is why Biden is really such a poor candidate when it comes to Trump, and why he's nowhere near as capable as Bernie in countering Trump. Then they go into a discussion of turnout in the 3 key states, and point out that there's no way for Biden to actually increase the turnout. He's not the person to do that. But Bernie is running a completely different campaign, and it's a campaign which is geared to turning more people out. And of course, they're right about that. The Obama voters who stayed home in 2016, one targeted survey has found, are focused overwhelmingly on bread and butter issues, with a larger share, 64%, emphasizing the economy and healthcare, Social Security, and Medicare. Then the registered voters as a whole, 55%, or even the famously precarious Obama-Trump have voters at 58%. If you think this suggests that these critical voters might be receptive to Bernie Sanders' message of healthcare, education, and good jobs for all, you are right. Bernie's favorability among this group, and this was as of December 20th, 2019, plus 38% for Bernie, far surpasses the favorability, of Uh, uh, um, okay, it surpasses Joe Biden's favorability rating, which then was at 35%, and also Warren's, which was at 16%. And they say, but the strongest argument for Bernie Sanders concerns a much larger group than any slice of disaffected Obama voters. The tens of millions of people, over 40% of the country, who typically do not vote in presidential elections. They point out that Bernie is distinctly popular with the young, the non-white, okay, and the working class people who normally do not vote, and that he's by far our best shot to mobilize this vast and slumbering army in a general election against Trump. And they say, quote, Democrats have a choice. Either nominate a challenger who excites young people and can turn them out en masse, or hand the nomination to someone who does not motivate them, greasing the wheels for another victory of Donald Trump. So going down, scrolling down the article much further, talking about a Trump and Bernie scenario, they say perhaps the most promising feature of this particular scenario, though, is the vivid contrast made possible by a binary choice between Sanders and Trump. Yes, other candidates may run, but the structure of our two-party state and the current depth, okay, of American party um, 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 the depth of the polarization of the party system will drive them rapidly into insignificance. Because Bernie's politics emphasize class conflict, a Trump Sanders contest promises to be not a mere clash of values and norms, okay, of cultural milieus, okay, and manners, but a referendum on the role of the rich and the rest in our society, with each contender actually representing different sides. Sanders has already given us a preview of what this is going to look like. When he launched his campaign in March, he contrasted his upbringings to Trump, saying, quote, I did not have a father who gave me millions of dollars to build luxury skyscrapers, casinos, and country clubs. I did not come from a family that gave me a $200,000 allowance every year beginning at the age of 3, unquote. And continuing with Bernie, quote, unlike Donald Trump, who shut down the government and left 800,000 federal employees without income to pay their bills, I know what it's like to be in a family that lives paycheck to paycheck, unquote. And then he added, quote, I did not come from a family that taught me to build a corporate empire through housing discrimination. I protested housing discrimination. I was arrested for for protesting school segregation. With Trump, Democrats, say Day and Carp, have been handed a golden opportunity to agitate against the ultra rich, personified by the billionaire who managed to bulldoze his way to the White House. But they have repeatedly dropped the ball electing instead to focus on Trump's buffoonery and real rule breaking at the expense of almost everything else. The current impeachment hearings narrowly focused on Trump's skullduggery in the Ukraine rather than his obscene efforts to enrich himself and to protect his class from the White House, exemplify the limits of this approach. The political emphasis of the Democrats fails to target the weakest point of Trump, the way his administration has functioned, like almost every other Republican administration, as a machine to transfer wealth from working people to the bosses, their bosses. In the 2016 campaign, Clinton left out the bread and butter and chose to wage a war on table manners against Trump. Since then, the Democratic establishment and its media allies have continued to put temperament, character, and stability at the center of their opposition strategy. If you restrict your viewing to MSNBC, DNC, I would say, you would get the impression that the main problem with the Orange Menace is that he's a uniquely obnoxious dinner guest rather than a plutocrat in a country ruled by plutocrats. Okay, and they go on in this vein and point out that Trump is the perfect symbol of the perversity of our failed capitalist economy. His presidency is the ultimate grotesquerie produced by a grotesque political order. And nobody can be trusted to make this case as vividly as Bernie Sanders. While Biden waxes nostalgic for abandoned sets of norms and Warren celebrates the sanctity of rules, Sanders talks meat and potatoes. His independence from the donor class make it possible for him to do what Clinton did not and Biden won't: leverage Trump's presidency into an indictment of the bipartisan pro-corporate establishment. Only Sanders can say, "This stops now." This strategy holds potential not only for a short-term victory, but for the return of a healthy dose of class antagonism to the American political discourse. And that's precisely what we need to build a real fight against the economic and political system that has produced Trump in the first place. And they go on to say that in a general election, we might expect Sanders to behave a bit more like he did during his first Senate race, which was against, by the way, a mega millionaire by the name of Rich Tarrant, who Sanders constantly referred to as the Richie Rich when he first ran for the Senate in 2006. By 2006, Vermont was clearly trending Democratic. But the Republican Senator Jim Jeffers, 6 years earlier, had won re-election by 40 points. Tarrant spent millions of his own money in the race, aiming to label Sanders, still a socialist curiosity on the national stage, as an out-of-touch, as a radical from Burlington who was out of touch. But Bernie too took the gloves off against the Richie Rich, activating his base of small donors and lambasting his opponent's effort to buy the election as a symptom of the rigged economy. In the most expensive Senate campaign in the history of that state, Sanders won by 33 points. And they opine that if Bernie brought that kind of energy to a general election against Donald Trump, it would amount to perhaps the most high-profile spectacle of class conflict in the modern history of electoral politics. And they say the campaign ad practically writes itself. I'm quoting now. In 1940s in New York City, two boys were born, only a few years and a few miles apart. One, the son of a real estate tycoon, grew up in a white, pillared and mansion. He literally did his paper route from the back of his father's limousine. The other, the son of a penniless immigrant whose family was killed in the Holocaust, but grew up in a Brooklyn apartment that was cramped, sleeping on a trundle bed, in the living room. One, educated in the best private schools that money could buy, devoted his life to the pursuit of profit and power. He abused tenants, stiffed his workers, and flaunted his wealth in New York's highest society circles. The other spent his life working in the trenches on behalf of the vast uh, the majority of people protesting segregation in Chicago, protecting poor tenants when he came to Burlington, Vermont, fighting for workers in Washington, and taking aim at the pampered elite who rule the economy from their penthouses. This is a dynamic we've never seen before in a presidential election. In fact, we've rarely seen anything like it in modern U.S. history at all. So submerged has class politics been beneath the bipartisan, pro corporate consensus and its pablum about the meritocracy and the marvels of capitalist free enterprise. The self seeking billionaire versus the lifelong crusader for the working class. It would be potent, okay, and but also resonant and emblematic of the deep economic divide that people intuitively understand but don't yet have the language for. It would be the kind of epic, symbolic rivalry in which you can imagine people taking a side for the first time in their lives. When people say that Sanders is a risk, they usually mean that his platform and his rhetoric are too far outside the political mainstream of the Democratic Party for comfort. But at this juncture itself, comfort itself is a risk. The right has taken advantage of the public's appetite for transformation in order to further enrich the masses of the universe. His opponents will have to take advantage of that same appetite to do the very opposite. Sanders' ambitious agenda actually represents a dramatic departure from the neoliberal democratic consensus. And that's exactly what we need to win. If we want to beat Trump and build a countervailing force capable of taking on the systems and institutions that have produced Trump, we can't afford not to nominate Bernie Sanders. And I thought that was one great, great piece that you should hear some of the rhetoric, but from. Now, moving on to January 20th, 2020. John Kelly wrote a piece for Common Dreams, staff writer for Common Dreams, entitled Bernie has been getting it right for 40 years. Now, says his movement, quote, we are going to win. Yes, we are. We are going to win. Now, let me get that back in a minute. There's a photo here, okay, of Bernie addressing a rally in in Exeter, New Hampshire, on Saturday, this past Saturday. Wow. There's a piece of art, okay, by Molly Crabapple holding a drawing she did of the 2020 candidate. And it says, "We have more wealth and equality than since the 1920s. It is grotesque, it is obscene, and it is unfair. If you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. Just imagine being 55 to 60 years of age and having nothing in your pocket." Yes, Bernie did say that, okay, in Exeter, New Hampshire, and elsewhere over this past weekend, okay, as well. Okay, let me bring it back to clearly now. Quote, "It's going to be the most epic case of moral whiplash the world has ever seen, and it's going to inspire the people around the world." I think that quote is about the campaign. They are not official members or designated surrogates of the campaign, but a potent and dynamic trio are among those showing up on the trail for Senator Bernie Sanders these days. They're determined to tell all who will listen just how profound an opportunity voters in the United States now have before them: the chance to elect an unapologetic person who's a progressive and visionary to the most powerful elected office in the country at a time when people on the planet need a champion they can trust, unlike any time in living memory. And John Cusack said, as depicted in this cartoon from the Crabapple, Bernie kept telling us the truth, what we needed to hear, not what we wanted to hear. Because when someone respects you, they tell the truth. He was a most troublesome man to those in power. He was not obedient. He did not bow down to the almighty dollar. And that's a photo of a drawing by Molly Crabapple of John Cusack at a campaign rally in New Hampshire over the weekend. And John Cusack gave quite a speech, okay, at these rallies, but in New Hampshire. He argued uh, that Bernie stands in the prophetic tradition of civil rights icons like MLK Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, okay, and Ella Baker, as well as other warriors for social justice, such as Gene Debs and Phil and Daniel Berrigan and Dorothy Day. Okay. As well as being an actor, Cusack is a writer, okay, and has been an activist, okay, for many years. And he wrote a book, okay, along with the novelist from India, uh, Arundhati Roy, "Things That Cannot Be Said," and is also a founding board member of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, which advocates for journalists' freedoms and free speech. Cusack told the crowd in Manchester that what the Sanders campaign has undertaken is not isolated from the great social and labor movements of the past, but rather the continuation of ongoing struggle against capitalist greed, okay, and militarism, racism, sexism, and the pervasive inequities that only a great many people joined together in community and solidarity can overcome. When he came on the national political scene in the 1980s, said Cusack, Quote, Bernie said all the things that cannot be said, and he was absolutely fearless. This was a man with a deep and powerful connection to the truth, a person with remarkable courage who proclaimed the absolute need for justice, equality, and dignity for all people. Unquote. K. Cusack also said, quote, what we needed to hear, not what we wanted to hear. And Cusack argues that Sanders' honesty is proof that he respects the American people. When a person respects you, they tell you the fucking truth, Cusack told the crowd, in Exeter, though he immediately apologized for the language and jokingly wondered if the campaign for which he is a volunteer might fire him. I saw that. It was funny. And he also said, quote, when Bernie Sanders is in the White House, he's going to fight for us. And how do we know that? Because he's always fought for us. Unquote. I'm sorry. This was something said, by Molly Crabapple, artist, and writer. And Cusack has also said, quote, Sanders has offered a principled and visionary critique of American empire. And, quote, again, publicly, loudly, and boldly rejected the hideous lie that unchecked greed and but predatory capitalism, all its cruelty was good. And so John Cusack made the case for Bernie Sanders in a very, very powerful way. And the video is there for you to click on, and to watch. And Cusack also said, for 40 years we've endured class warfare from above. And for 40 years, Bernie Sanders was there fighting back. And for 4 decades, Bernie was right. He was right again and again and again. And Cusack added, quote, we've never ever in our lifetimes had a true champion of social, economic, and climate justice this close to the White House. And he called Sanders a profile of courage, clarity, and consistently for 40 years. And he asked, but has, quote, the world caught up to the moral vision of Bernie Sanders, unquote. And then Cusack said, well, that's up to us. In remarks at an event in Conway, New Hampshire on Sunday afternoon, the writer and artist Crabapple, who has in fact drawn what the Green New Deal could and ought to look like, said, I believe we have to be able to see the future we are fighting for, quote, unquote. After denouncing Trump as a reality TV show huckster, someone who, quote, stokes vile bigotry while he and his rich friends rob America blind, do you know what beats the politics of hate? The politics of solidarity, unquote. Crabapple also said, we have the chance to elect a president who has spent his whole life fighting for the working class. When Bernie Sanders is in the White House, he's going to fight for us. And how do we know that? Because he's always fought for us. And then there's a video of Crabapple's speech, as well. Joining Crabapple and Cusack on the trail for Bernie over the weekend was that icon of the climate movement, namely Naomi Klein, who's a friend of both, who in November endorsed Sanders not only based on his longtime commitment to social justice, but because she also believes there is simply no other candidate in the race who has adequately shown they understand the, quote, existential urgency, unquote, of the climate crisis. Unquote, said Klein, we are here saying not me, us, unquote, because we know that even if the White House has turned into the set of some twisted, never ending, a nuclear armed reality TV show, this is in fact not a show. This is reality. And we need a real human being in the White House who gets the stakes, the unfathomable stakes of the moment that we are living, that gets it in their bones. And that person is Senator Bernie Sanders, unquote. But decrying how little progress was made and how much opposition there was to even incremental change. The last time Democrats had control of the White House and Congress, Klein, whose latest book is, quote, On Fire, The Burning Case for a Green by New Deal, unquote, argued what Sanders what Sanders represents is something that was nearly impossible to imagine just a few years ago. Klein said, I want you to picture what it would look like to have a president in the White House who we didn't have to find and drag, kicking and screaming to stop new pipelines, and new corporate trade deals that do not mention climate change or new fracking projects, but who actually was an organizer in chief who understood the existential urgency and wanted to lead this transformation with movements driving it from below, unquote. And you can also watch her speech. The video is linked to from this Common Dreams article. Klein said, it's going to be the most epic case of moral whiplash the world has ever seen. And it's going to inspire people around the world to find their own survival instinct and act like the house is on fire because it is, unquote. Though clear-eyed about the challenges and opposition the Sanders campaign now faces, Klein said, quote, I believe we can perform this miracle, unquote. She admitted to the crowd she didn't always feel this way. Quote, I did not always believe that a man as principled as Bernie Sanders, with his record of fighting against war and greed and for the rights of working people and a healthy environment, could be president, unquote. And why? Because, as she said to the crowd, quote again, I think the answer is that our expectations were low because our expectations had been systematically lowered for a very long time, unquote. Like Cusack, Klein invoked the 40-year period of neoliberalism since Reagan as a time of defeats and defensive measures for the progressive movement. She said, don't get me wrong, we put up some good fights against bad trade deals and factory shutdowns and illegal wars and polluting pipelines and healthcare cuts back and racist violence by the police. And sometimes we won a single victory in these fights. Mostly we didn't, unquote. And then, of course, there's a link to a video providing her speech in Conway, New Hampshire. Klein also pointed to the larger, more organized movement that Bernie has now, bigger than in 2016, now representing millions of people who previously did not realize just how many others there were or how powerful they could be. Something has profoundly changed in ways that once seemed impossible to imagine. And while Sanders and the grassroots movement that he is leading are now on the verge of something potentially historic, Klein warned, quote, there is profound responsibility, unquote, for what happens next, quote, because now our entire planet hangs in the balance, unquote, in the crucial years ahead. And if Bernie was right about what we should have done in the past 40 years, then it's time to believe that he is right about what we can do in the next 40 years, to really believe it. Because screw being right, this time we are going to win. Citing a phrase that Cusack said the day before when he described Sanders as someone with the, quote, future in his eyes, Klein ended her speech on Sunday by saying, it's increasingly clear the world is catching up to the wisdom Sanders has long been offering. Quote, he was waiting for us, all of us, the power of us, the power so long suppressed under that blanket of lies. And that, she concluded, is, quote, what this campaign, okay, is all about. So what I want you to take with you from this is, will these three, and Cornel West, okay, and also Nina Turner, and all of the rest of Bernie's surrogates, including Ocasio-Cortez and Omar, okay, and Tlaib, okay, and also Jayapal, and Larry Cohn, and the whole magnificent stable of people he now has aligned with him. Will they appear for rallies, okay, in Iowa and in New Hampshire over these next 2 weeks, carrying the campaign just as intensely as it has been run heretofore, while Bernie, okay, is in the Senate? Will they carry the torch to these states and beyond to Nevada and South Carolina while he can't be physically available? Will they go for him? Will they run the same kinds of meetings and town halls and rallies that he has run? We know that they are all powerful speakers and they're all totally committed, and we know that they can speak for him. I think they're going to step up. I think they're going to be there. And I think that campaign is going to be just as powerful, if not even more powerful, in Iowa and in New Hampshire and in the other two states for the period that he is stuck at the trial of Donald Trump in the Senate. That's what I think. That's what I predict. Let's hope that I am right about that. And last weekend, of course, there was Jaya Powell's endorsement. And what did she say? She said, in the title of this article by the staff of Common Dreams, done on January 19th, 2020, that is just yesterday. because, quote, I can feel Bernie beating Trump. Jayapal endorses Sanders for president. And there's a photo of her. And I'll go through this quickly but unclearly. She said, what I feel we need is a candidate who is entirely authentic about what's wrong and steadfast about it and can rally people to believe he can trust them, she said to the Washington Post on Sunday. Quote, Bernie has that. I can feel Bernie beating Trump, unquote. She further said, quote, he has a clarity on policy prescriptions that goes right to the heart of what working people need. And Sanders praised Jayapal as, quote, a brilliant leader for progressive ideas, which, by the way, she actually is. And he added, she has led the fight against Trump's racism, sexism, and xenophobia. And he also said, together we will defeat Trump and build a working class movement and transform the country so it works for all. And she did join Bernie Sanders in Iowa for a rally tonight. And there she made the endorsement official. And progressive allies in Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, and Mark Pocan of Wisconsin, all of whom have already endorsed Sanders, applauded Jayapal for joining the growing club of Bernie backers. Ocasio-Cortez said it was a really big deal. Okay, and her co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Mark Pocan, said, quote, um, 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 oh, the progressives are united to defeat Donald Trump, proud to work alongside Pramila every day, and excited to stand with her in the fight for working people to ensure Bernie Sanders is our next president. Her endorsement was very, very exciting, and you can really feel the momentum beginning to build. I shouldn't say actually beginning to build. I think it's at a fever pitch in these campaigns. In the events that I watched over the weekend, uh, by the people who attended those were really feeling the burn at this point. Things are really at a fever pitch in this campaign. And again, I think they will continue to be. But it's not just a matter of against Trump, and it's not simply a matter of what Bernie advocates for, but as we know from these past couple of weeks, it is how Bernie compares to his his strongest competitors for the nomination of the Democratic Party. Of course, there's just been that kerfuffle with Warren, okay, and an attempt by the establishment to derail the Bernie train through the ridiculous charge coming from Warren that implying at first, okay, that Bernie was a sexist, okay, and then admitting that he was not, but still maintaining the claim that he told her that a woman could not be president of the United States in a private meeting that they had. And so we know that that now is played out in such a way that Senator Warren has lost support due to this attack on Bernie, and that the sexist attack on him seems to not have fallen on ears that are deaf, but on ears that are red with rage that someone would dare to say that to Bernie Sanders again, would dare to raise the kinds of smears that were being raised against him in 2016, and by someone claiming to be a progressive yet. But now, in moving on to Joe Biden, last time I went through an article by Ryan Grimm, okay, at The Intercept, cataloging how Joe Biden tried to cut Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare for 40 years. But hang on a second, please. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, sorry for that small interruption. Uh, okay, the title of this article, written by Branko Marcetic, is Joe Biden tried to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare for 40 years. And this article is an excerpt from Marcetic's forthcoming book, Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden. And you can now order a copy of this new book, direct from Jacobin, for only $10 with free shipping. It looks like it'll be a great book for the campaign. The article starts off by looking back to 1981. I'll put this into clearly. Biden said then he had been persuaded to evolve from a New Deal Democrat into something else by his fellow lawmakers. This was at the start of the neoliberal era, following the transition period of the Carter administration, when there was still some New Dealers around. And Biden said then, I've been made a believer over the last 9 years in the Senate. The teachings of economists, he continued, had made him reluctant to listen to his Republican colleagues about the dangers of deficit spending, particularly when he was just an impressionable 29-year-old, quote, not too long out of college. But he said eventually he was worn down. Quote, as I listened over the years in this body, I became more and more a believer in balanced budgets, unquote, he said. This is so ironic. He became a believer in balanced budgets just at the time when the United States went off the gold standard, when there was no need any longer at all for balanced budgets. Just no need for them for a monetary sovereign. We went off the gold standard in 1971. Some people then understood the closely held secret that the government could run deficits, that it could create money, that it was a monetary sovereign. And just at this time, Joe Biden was getting convinced by a lot of his colleagues in the Senate that deficit spending was so very dangerous. Anyway, he got an olive branch from Reagan, or at least he called it, okay, an olive branch, a spending freeze that also raised taxes, and that led him to link arms with two Republican colleagues on the Budget Committee in the Senate. And he introduced his own freeze proposal in 1984, saying then it would be labeled a draconian, quote unquote. His plan cut $230 billion from the deficit over 3 years. Fairly big cuts at that time. Almost $100 billion more than even Reagan's proposal. And proposed doing it partly by eliminating schedule increases for Social Security and Medicare beneficiaries. It would, he said, shock the living devil out of everyone in the U.S. Senate. And by the way, this followed the Great Compromise on Social Security in 1983 between Tip O'Neill, okay, and Reagan, where it was decided that they were going to nearly double Social Security payments to put more money in the trust fund so they wouldn't have to worry about Social Security again for 60 years. This compromise was made in 1983. And already by 1984, Biden was terrorizing people with freeze proposals that we couldn't afford to give people their increases in Social Security and okay, in Medicare, in spite of the 60-year so-called compromise they had made the year before. What a hypocrite. As bemused commentators would note decades later, this was all straight from the playbook of Tea Party darling Paul Ryan. However, it was done 30 years before Paul Ryan. Sorry, 25 years before Paul Ryan was proposing similar things. When Biden directly ran against Ryan for vice president in 2012, he warned voters Ryan was a threat to their hard-earned entitlements. So he was telling people Ryan was a threat, implying that he and Obama weren't any threat, right? While at the time, they kept trying to negotiate grand bargains with the Republicans, cutting Social Security, K, and Medicare. Though the freeze failed, it was only the beginning. Biden supposedly had an ongoing distaste for a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, which some of the Republicans were advocating for in the early 1980s and later as well. But so Biden had, quote, an ongoing distaste for such an amendment, but it didn't stop him from introducing a similar amendment in 1984. This one tied spending growth but to the growth of GNP and inflation, which he referred to as a pay-as-you-go measure, the pay-go idea that we've talked about so often here. Biden was a partisan for pay-go in the early 1980s. Calling it a much more realistic approach, he proudly boasted that he had, quote, literally plagiarized, unquote, it from Pete DuPont, who at that time was the Republican governor of, if I recall, of Delaware. Of course, the state of Delaware had been run by DuPont for ages and ages, okay, and ages. Okay, actually, Pete DuPont was considered a pretty liberal Republican, but Biden plagiarized, the idea from him. It's ironic that Biden had to drop out of the 1988 campaign over charges of literal plagiarism when he was a student, okay, in law school, I believe. That sort of torpedoed his 1988 campaign for the president. See, later that year, Biden backed the line item veto, an anti spending measure cherished by Reagan and the conservative movement. And he also championed, okay, another anti budget measure, this one successful, requiring Congress to vote on freezing the budget for 1 year before it could raise the debt ceiling. His campaign then ran ads on the radio claiming that, quote, cutting the deficit is more important than party differences, unquote. Biden's antipathy to government spending and deficits found its most radical expression in the form of the balanced budget constitutional amendment, which he had viewed as laughable and dangerous in previous decades, but with the advent of the 1990s, he now warmed up to it. The opponents of the amendment, of course, argued that making a balanced federal budget a constitutional requirement not only hamstring the government during times of emergency, but require even during economic downturns when most economists advise more government spending and when spending cuts had historically plunged countries into even greater misery, the government to sharply raise taxes or more likely make drastic cuts to core, often life-saving programs. To the to the relief of the progressives and hundreds of economists, the amendment never passed under Bill Clinton. But with the help of a wavering Joe Biden, it came perilously close. With the backing of Biden, who was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate at that time, uh, he started off the decade by endorsing the amendment 2 years in a row. In a 1991 report he issued, he warned that, quote, the spree of deficit spending by our federal government must be curbed, unquote. All the while, Biden acknowledged it would be a disaster. Quote, this is a lousy amendment, unquote, he said in 1991. Quote, it's not a good idea, except I can't think of any other idea except maintaining the status quo. And the status quo thinks, unquote. He explained, quote, prepared to take what I consider radical medicine, unquote, to tackle deficits. Where have we heard this nonsense before? We've been hearing it now for so many, many years. There he was in 1994 saying the same thing. But then, anyway, he stayed undecided on whether he was going to vote for the amendment or not in 1994. But then he and several other Democrats, including John Kerry and Harry Reid, came out against the amendment, causing it to fall 4 votes short of the 67 that needed to pass. Biden instead voted for a doomed alternative offered by Reid that insulated Social Security and construction projects from any painful cuts. But that sweetener was gone from the version that made it to the Senate floor at the start of the next year under a very different Congress and a distinctly new political landscape. Oh, that is to say, the Gingrich years. In between, the United States had experienced something of a political revolution as a cadre of right wing radicals fed up with what they saw as the Republican Party's timidity and feebleness took over the House, putting both chambers of Congress in the party's hands for the first time in 40 years. In many ways, this was a more significant victory for the conservative movement than Reagan's had been in 1980. After all, it was Congress that shaped and passed the laws, and Reagan's vision had been largely stifled by Democratic control of the House throughout his presidency. Well, considering it was largely stifled, all I can say is he did an awful lot of damage. Anyway, Marcetic says the George Washington of this victory was Georgia Representative Newt Gingrich. And of course, he talks about now the 10-point contract with America that aimed to finish what Reagan had started, that the victorious um, uh, the victorious Republicans had signed and campaigned on. A balanced budget amendment was one of its key planks. With the political calculus now altered, the Clinton administration toned down its opposition to the amendment. Alice Rivlin, who was director of the Office of Management and Budget at the time, warned it would exaggerate the boom-bust cycle, engineer worse recessions, and make for bad economic policy and bad constitutional policy. And by the way, while she was doing that, she was closely associated with Peter G. Peterson, who's been one of the most austerity-minded people in D.C. all through this period of time. But even Peterson and Rivlin did not want a crazy amendment like that. The White House made clear it lost the appetite to fight. Gingrich left the meeting with Clinton with the impression he was not going to engage in an aggressive campaign against the measure. The 1995 version of the amendment, which required the prohibitively high threshold of 3/5 of both chambers of Congress to either raise the debt limit or pass a non-balanced budget, was sponsored and championed by Illinois' Paul Simon, one of the Senate's stalwart liberals. This was a strange thing because, there was a generation of liberals who came into the Senate in the late 70s and early 1980s, and Paul Simon, was one of them, who were very socially liberal and economically liberal also in certain ways when it came to distribution of wealth. Paul Simon was that. But not at all liberal when it came to budgets, wanting to reduce deficits and wanting to balance budgets. And Paul Simon was like that. And Paul Wellstone, the Minnesota liberal, so famous for being liberal on the left of the Democratic Party, and a friend of Bernie Sanders, by the way, at that time. It was another one of these liberals who were, I don't know if Wellstone was ever in favor of that amendment, but he may well have been. Anyway, it was championed by Paul Simon and backed by prominent Democrats like Tom Daschle, the minority leader at the time, and of course, Joe Biden. And Biden said, something is going to come bouncing out of here and sent to the states to be ratified. The amendment had real flaws, he repeated. but vowed to back it because we need something, quote unquote. It's just so crazy that people would consider passing an amendment to the Constitution which had real flaws. I mean, an amendment to the Constitution, if it has real flaws, you can't get overcome those flaws or get rid of those flaws. You can't pass amendments that have real flaws because there's some kind of compromise. That's not practical. I mean, an amendment is like a straitjacket. It's insane. Anyway, Biden repeated that and he vowed to back it because we need something. After several Democratic attempts to make it more forgiving failed, Biden and the rest of the committee, on a 15-3 vote, once more sent the amendment to the Senate. He prepared to vote for it. He said, "Some of us tried to make this a better proposal. Faced with the choice of an imperfect amendment or continued spending," he said, "he had sufficient confidence in our citizens and our political institutions that will confront any challenges, quote unquote, from its many flaws." How can you overcome a challenge when you're suddenly in a depression and you cannot deficit spend? How are you going to get out of the depression? How are you going to overcome that flaw? Oh, God. To make the spending cuts a balanced budget actually demanded, countless programs that Americans relied on would have had to be cut or eliminated. Low-income housing, heating assistance, federally funded school lunches, mass transit, even the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which funded hundreds of TV and radio stations around the country, not to mention the big three entitlements: Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. Bernie warned it would be a disaster for working people, for elderly people, for low-income people. In the end, a sufficient number of Democrats were spooked by the threat posed to Social Security and other programs to defeat the amendment, including Daschle and even California's conservative Senator Dianne Feinstein, both of whom had been on board with the idea of 1994. But the decisions of Biden and two other Democrats to switch their votes in favor of the amendment brought it a mere 2 votes shy of the two-thirds majority needed for passage. The 1996 re-election contest meant that Biden doubled down on his support for the amendment. Biden was facing an opponent who sought to paint him as an overly liberal flip-flopper. I don't know if he was overly liberal, but he certainly was a flip-flopper, huh? But businessman Ray Clatworthy was not only considered too far right by the Republican he'd beaten in the primary, he was the first rival in Biden's career who could match him in fundraising. Despite experts stressing his seat was one of the country's safest, that was borne out by his eventual 22-point margin of victory, Biden, per usual, moved to the right. While fighting for re-election, he became one of just 12 Democrats to side with a near-unanimous GOP to again bring the balanced budget amendment within 2 votes of passage. So, he is in favor of balanced budget amendments. His spokesman told the press that he would use his vote as leverage to make improvements to the measure, such as exempting Social Security, but then quickly added that Biden would vote for it no matter what, undermining any leverage he might have had. That's the Biden way. That was the Obama way, by the way. Whatever economic motivation Biden may have had to support the amendment was undercut when more than 1,000 economists, including 11 Nobel Prize winners, signed a letter pleading with Congress not to adopt it. James Tobin cautioned it would, quote, put the federal government to a fiscal straitjacket. Another compared its insistence on keeping spending strictly below revenue, quote, telling the Atlantic Ocean not to cross a line in the sand, unquote. Despite dithering in the days leading up to the vote, Biden voted for the third straight year to approve the amendment that even he, along with just about everyone outside of anti government right wing circles, including his local newspaper, had warned would bring economic catastrophe. He joined all 55 of the Senate's Republicans and just 10 other Democrats. The amendment failed by just one vote. Against Biden's best efforts, disaster had been averted. So that's the story of how Biden tried to pass, but not only directly oppose the entitlements, Social Security, Medicaid, okay, Medicare, but indirectly tried to pass a constitutional amendment all through the 90s that would have ended up cutting the heart out of Social Security and Medicare and exposed us to depressions as deep as the one the New Deal got us out of, the Great Depression. This man, Joe Biden, has been wrong again and again over the 40 years that Bernie Sanders has been right again and again and again. Joe Biden has been wrong again and again and again. So wrong on Social Security, wrong on Medicare, wrong on the Balanced Budget Amendment, wrong on Medicaid, wrong on the TPP, wrong on NAFTA, wrong on the Iraq War, wrong on every major foreign policy decision, wrong on every major economic decision, wrong on the grand bargain, wrong, 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 wrong. Why are people still supporting this man? Why are seniors still supporting this man? He would cut the heart out of Social Security. He would cut the heart out of Medicare by passing dangerous measures that he knew were flawed. Because after all, what else could we do? We had the deficit. He still believes we have the deficit as a historic problem. So, just a piece of good news before I go to your comments. I've been on for a long time today. This news just surfaced, okay, today. It's in Common Dreams, an article by John Kelly. In historic shift, the second largest physicians group in the U.S. has a new prescription. Guess what? It's Medicare for all. More than 2,000 physicians announced an open letter to the American public prescribing single-payer Medicare for all in a full-page ad in the New York Times that will run in the print edition tomorrow, January 21st, 2020. In a separate but related move, the American College of Physicians, the ACP, a national organization representing 159,000 internists, has officially endorsed single-payer Medicare for all reform. The ACP is the largest medical specialty society and the second largest physician group in the country after the American Medical Association. So that's amazing. That happened only today. And Bernie commented, quote, all over this country, a growing number of doctors are sick and tired of the enormous waste and bureaucracy that exists in our cruel and dysfunctional healthcare system, unquote. And the quote from the Annals of Internal Medicine, Although the United States leads the world in healthcare spending, it fares far worse than its peers on coverage in most dimensions of value. Cost and coverage are intertwined. Many Americans cannot afford health insurance, and even those with insurance face substantial cost-related barriers to care. Employer-sponsored insurance is less prevalent and more expensive than in the past, and in response, deductibles have grown and benefits have been cut. The long-term solvency of U.S. Public insurance programs is a perennial concern. The United States spends far more on healthcare administration than peer countries. Uh, the administrative barriers divert time from patient care and frustrates patients. Also clinicians and policymakers. Major changes are needed to a system that costs too much, leaves too many behind, and delivers too little. And Bernie Sanders, of course, is delighted that this has happened. Scrolling through the article. While the ACP did not say Medicare for All was the only way to achieve a more equitable, accessible, and sustainable healthcare system, the ACP laid out 4 recommendations for achieving universal coverage in the United States. They are: ACP recommends the United States transition to a system that achieves by universal coverage with essential benefits and lower administrative costs. 2. Coverage should not be dependent on a person's place of residence, employment, health status, or income. Coverage should ensure access to clinicians, hospitals, other sources of care. 2 options could achieve these objectives: a single payer financing approach or a publicly financed coverage option to be offered along with regulated private insurance. Now, let's be clear on what that last actually means. It is a public option, but it's a public option where the private insurance companies are heavily regulated. The public option proposals you're seeing from Joe Biden, and from Buttigieg, and from other candidates for the presidency don't talk about a heavily regulated private insurance system, which would still survive. There are some countries that have universal coverage and that are quite successful at actually providing it at an affordable cost. It's affordable cost. It's still more expensive than in many, many other countries, but Germany and Switzerland are outstanding examples where there's still private insurance, but the private insurance companies are heavily regulated. Their profits uh, are held down and are very small. The overhead they can charge is very small. Japan is like that also. But private insurance companies that you can buy coverage from, in Japan, they have administrative costs. Oh, they allow administrative costs of something like 1 to 1.5%. Okay? And they're nonprofit companies over there as well. So those are very, very low costs. But in those countries, when companies are regulated, they are regulated. They're not kidding when they say regulation. They have teeth. That kind of thing would probably be unacceptable, in this country. The ACP said that while a transition to Medicare for All could be highly disruptive, they said, quote, "a single-payer financing approach could achieve its vision of a system where everyone will have coverage and access to the care they need at a cost they and the country can afford. It also could achieve our vision of a system where spending will have been redirected from healthcare administration to funding coverage, research, public health, and interventions to address social determinants of health. Now, uh, there are other quotations from here. I wanted to call your attention to the following. While the ACP, in its backing of a single payer approach, also co endorsed the more incremental step of creating a federally administered public option as a pathway to universal coverage, Dr. Steffi Woolhandler and David Himmelstein, co-founders of the Physicians for a National Health Program, argue that the latter would be an inferior avenue if the aim is to cover everyone while reducing overall costs. According to an op-ed by Woolhandler and Himmelstein, also published in the Annals, and it was published alongside the ACP's a new position paper by universal coverage would be costlier under the public choice model the ACP co-endorses along with single payer. Unlike a public-private mix of coverage that the public option would represent, the pair write a single a single-payer Medicare for all system would allow hospitals and doctors to save billions on billing-related costs each year, and those savings could be repurposed to expand care to millions for less cost than the status quo. And here's the ad that's going into the Times tomorrow with a full listing of the 2,000 doctors who have signed it, that I mentioned before. Okay. I'm not going to read off some of the names here. Okay, I'll have a chance tomorrow to go into the report, hopefully. And if I do, I'll be talking some Medicare for All tomorrow night. And I'm also going to go into the letter that was written by Himmelstein, and Woolhandler to point out the differences in costs between the two options of Medicare for All and the public choice model the ACP is co-endorsing. Okay. So, okay, I'm going to turn now to consider your comments with, of course, my reminder that I ask you to please share, like, and subscribe the YouTube video that will go up soon after this is over. And of course, I'd like you to please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And thank you very much if you can see your way clear to do that. For now, I'm going to check in with you and see how you're doing with your comments and questions. For some reason, I see, oh, here I am. I was blacked out. I see a lot of you are still hanging in here. I'm very happy to see that. I thank you all for doing so. Uh, thank you for hanging in. Let me start by going over your comments now. Kay said, I saw that post too, Lana. And Evelina said, yes, well. But did he say Biden was corrupt? There was a bunch of Twitter drama on that particular item. Robin Halsey says MLK's last speech was about economic injustice. Yes, and MLK advocated for a job guarantee way back when. Susan Eldridge said, sign up to volunteer at berniesanders.com. Indeed, sign up to volunteer. I've signed up to volunteer. And Lana says, yes, two or three more, I believe. Robin says, that's where we begin to see inequality and injustices get corrected, by economic justice. Steve says, not before Iowa. Two more in February, I believe. Yes, there are two more in February. The next one is February 7th. It'll be in time for the New Hampshire primary. And the DNC said anyone who can get a delegate in Iowa will be eligible for the debate. They have to exceed 15% in order to get a delegate, in Iowa. So, oh, here's Bonnie. She came in to sit with me and to heckle me. Oh, I know. I'm below the horizon. She's giving me the high sign that, I'm below the horizon. So I will start to look at the monitor again so I'll be able to see better without actually going below the horizon. Susan says if you can get on the Bernie Slack, you can phone bank for Bernie almost any time from your home. Okay. I'll try to stop falling below the horizon here, people. Robin says, I live in an all black neighborhood and I know that they don't know about Bernie. I plan on mailing out a flyer to those on my block as I can't walk too well. So I'm going to offer something in writing, handwritten envelopes at least. Hopefully, they can at least find out that Bernie exists. It's really amazing that there are so many who do not know about Bernie yet. Steve says, yes, he has a GoFundMe. And Mad Hildebrandt is visiting again. Cheyenne says, I took some time to adapt. Proper clothing is a key, and breathing in the fresh, cold air. Yeah, that's awful. Susan says, if you go to Bernie's Substack, you can sign up to get uh, David Sirota's burn notice emails, which, knowing David Sirota, I'm sure that they're always great. And Paul Krugman was calling out Sirota for criticizing Biden. Yeah, there's Paul Krugman. He's trying to get that Secretary of the Treasury post again, or maybe the chairperson of the National Economics Council. And Robin Halsey says thank you to Susan. And Kay says Robert Reich loves Bernie, I think. Robert Reich has turned to Bernie. He was part of the economic dream team that Bernie formed back in, I believe it was 2013, if I recall correctly. He was on the dream team with Jamie Galbraith and Stephanie Kelton and Randy Ray, and Bill Black. Also Tim Canova, Jeffrey Sachs. That's a lot of the dream team. If I recall correctly, there were 12 economists, who were on the dream team. They weren't all strictly economists. And Robert Reich was in that particular number. Tim Canova, okay, is not an economist either. Uh, Robin says you can also text or phone bank from home if you want to try that. Rob Rivera has joined. Hey, Rob, how are you? And Kay says Biden is as big a liar as the orange idiot. I think he's as big an idiot as the orange idiot, too. I mean, especially now. Whatever he had going for him in the 1980s or the 1990s uh, is long gone. All he has going for him now is the hair on his legs that turned blonde in the sun. Oh boy. Oh God. That was embarrassing when he said that, wasn't it? Susan Eldred says, go to events, BernieSanders.com to find Bernie events near you. And Susan does a little campaigning for Bernie, which is fine with me. Bernie 2020 events and Mobilize America. Steve says we have a number of Bernie offices here when people can drop it in phone bank. Some people have phone bank house parties as well. I'm frozen here for a few seconds while I access the new comments. I hope I can scroll now. Kay says, but Delaware is a very corrupt state. I wouldn't even say that. I would say it's bought. It's been bought by DuPont. It's thoroughly owned by DuPont. They've always owned it. Owned by DuPont and owned by the financial interests who have incorporated there. And Lana says, so Joe Biden is another Dem who's really a Republican? Yep. Joe Biden's another Dem who's really a Republican. Yep. That's why Obama selected him. Obama knew what he was doing. He wanted another Democrat who's really a Republican, just like he. And Robin Halsey said, so Bloomberg just did an NBC interview saying he was the best Dem choice because he was budget spending conscientious. OMFG. Oh my fucking God. And Lana says, Dr. Jordan, another day would you do a show on Bernie's school program, Thurgood Marshall? If you have not, already done so. Okay, I will do that, on another day, Lana. And Bonnie reminds me again, I have to look at the monitor. Please excuse the freezing. I scroll. And Russ says, Biden sounds like he's co-owner, of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. Yep. Rob says, Joe Biden is right. We need to freeze spending, including Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and veterans benefits. We need to support the balanced budget amendment Joe is pushing since the 80s. It's irresponsible to leave our children, my grandchildren. And there's Rob doing devil's advocate again. It's selfish and we must pay off our national debt. Who cares if it causes a global depression like the world has never seen? I just don't get it. I can't tell if Joe Biden is lying or he's just stupid, but I suspect if you're in Congress that long and have no idea if federal spending really works. So, yes, Joe Biden is horrible and should be absolutely ashamed of himself, and that alone should be an automatic disqualification. And Robin Halsey says, it's like Bernie is the only Dem running against all the rethugs. Well, that's right. He is the only Dem running. He is. The point is, I really find it funny. I find it funny when people say that Bernie is not even a member of the Democratic Party, because that's like saying Franklin Delano Roosevelt is not even a member of the Democratic Party. It's just like saying that. It's just like saying that. Most of the Democrats today are not really members of the Democratic Party. They're just people who registered as Democrats and took over the damn party starting in the 1980s. And it's time for us to take it back. Bernie needs to be more vocal on PR ASAP, especially after earthquakes. Biden has said nothing as far as I know, yet many Puerto Rican Americans are blindly voting for Biden. Yeah, that's really incredible. But I think Ocasio-Cortez should be able to fix that, hopefully. And Steve Wolfbrand says, gotta go. Good night, all. Good night, Steve. And Lana says, another day, would you do a show on Bernie's school program, Thurgood Marshall, if you have not already done so? NK says, won't be far behind you, Steve. Knight. And Robin Halsey says, Dems on crime, claiming they feared being called soft on crime and came up with new laws just to prove it. Okay, I know they feared that. They really feared that, and all through the 80s and 90s, and for the last 40 years, the Democrats have been the most chicken-hearted political party ever in human existence. They started becoming that during the last half of the 1970s, and by the time that Reagan took over the presidency, they were really running as fast as they could go from the liberal label. The reason why the Democrats on the left, okay, who are the progressive Democrats, call themselves by that name today is because Democrats during the 1980s ran as fast as they could go from the liberal name. Remember, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was one of the leading liberals of the 1930s and 40s. I mean, the liberals were the people who brought you the New Deals. They were different from the earlier progressives and more left. The earlier progressives were clean government, non-corruption types. And the paradigm of those was actually La Follette in Wisconsin. He was the paradigm of the progressive. Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive mayor. If you want to look for what the old-style progressives were, that's what they were. But if you want to look for the nearly socialist Democrats of the late 1940s and early 1950s and the period up to the 1970s, like, for example, John K. Galbraith, Jamie Galbraith's father, who declared in the early 70s that he was a Democratic but socialist, in one of his books. Uh, they viewed themselves, okay, as liberals. That's what they were called. And the Democrats ran away from them during the Carter administration. They ran away from the fight. Lanadell and Rob said, "That'd be great if you can do that, Dr. Joe. My daughter Devora joined. I think I'm running way behind. Probably a lot of people joined and have gone already." So let me see if I can get through these comments. Okay, I'll only pick up the most important comments. Kay says, "I think they just weren't paying attention to the facts." Well, remember the mainstream media and the press tend to have a blackout on inconvenient truths. And most people have been victimized, actually, by that. From the perspective of the 90s, but Joe Biden seemed to be a nice liberal person. Susan says, "Looks like Krugman is now saying that Bernie is lying about Biden's record on Social Security." It's in the New York Times op-ed. "That we have the YouTube receipts. We do." Paul Krugman is himself a liar. He really is. He really is. I've got some blog posts, okay, on Krugman relating to his attacks, okay, on MMT. We had the receipts, okay, on those too. He was an ignoramus trying to tear down MMT with some name calling and some labeling. Awful. Doc, will Steyer endorse Bernie when he finally drops out? He seems to have a man crush, okay, on Bernie. Well, okay, I'm not sure we should be making fun of Tom Steyer. He's a billionaire. He certainly is. But he seems to be really serious about the climate and really serious about doing things for people. Now, he has been a mainstream type, okay, of thinker and a major support for the Democratic Party in California. However, over the years, he's been moving increasingly left. And he does seem to be very supportive, okay, of Bernie and very respectful, okay, of Bernie. Now, I don't know where he could possibly fit in with Bernie. The reason why is that Bernie, to stay true to himself, has to avoid getting financial support from billionaires. So it's hard to see what a billionaire could do for Bernie, because most of what they could do is in the realm of financial support. But of course, it's impossible for Steyer to play his accustomed role in politics, which is as a funder. Okay, and I think that Bernie is not so welcoming to billionaires who want to join with him in a constructive way to support the bottom up kinds of politics that Bernie is ultimately for. The us, not me campaign. I'm finding it hard to figure out how Steyer would fit into that campaign. I personally think what he has to do is work through his own think tanks and support in a creative way the Green New Deal movement through nonprofit think tanks and through media organizations which are nonprofit as well and which he carefully sets up so he no longer controls them. He needs to do something like that. And the amount of money he spent on this campaign, which is, I think it's approaching $200 million, could have been much better spent on those kinds of things. Kay says Bernie marched, okay, with MLK. By the way, so did I march with MLK. I wasn't at the march, okay, on Washington, but I was in the Detroit march, okay, a few months before that, which was led, okay, by MLK and by the the union, okay, of auto workers, the UAW, and by many other Michigan unions. I was a graduate student, okay, at Michigan State at the time, and my wife and I came down, and we marched in that march, which was 125,000 people strong. It was no slouch of a march either. Kay says, I learned about Bernie when he used to do brunch with Bernie every Friday on the Tom Hartman show, years before he ran the first time. And Kay said people used to call into that show and plead with Bernie to run the first time. Kay says, well, I'm out of here tonight. Thank you for the great chat. Nice to have like-minded people to talk to. Thank you, Joe, for being here. And Susan Eldridge says, good night, all. And Russ says, chicken-hearted and spineless. Russ says, a little after 11 o'clock here. You need to call it a night. See you again soon. Thanks, Russ. Great to see you here. And Lana says that Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive. Not necessarily an economic progressive, very much. He was a clean government progressive. But in foreign policy, as you know, he was an imperialist. Quite the imperialist. He was very good on conservation, though, on the environment, as we would say today. He did some very great things, okay, in that area. And of course, he was very good in the area of trying to clean up Washington and support clean government, okay, in general. And Lana says, yes, I think Steyer is genuine. He seems honest. Yes, I think he's genuine too. I respect him as an individual. He's not like the others. He's not a Bloomberg, okay, at all. He's much more lefty than Bloomberg is, just for perspective. Yeah, Bloomberg is this no labels guy who shifts, from being a Republican to being a Democrat. Lana says TR was a warmonger. He was. Dolores says Steyer could help with the federal job guarantee. Well, I'm not sure how he could help with the federal job guarantee, honey. But he could help by supporting research on the federal job guarantee, policy papers. And Lana says Steyer, Secretary of the Interior, okay, or the EPA, something to do, okay, with the Green New Deal. Uh, I think the head of the EPA should probably be Bill McKibben or somebody like that. Okay, or perhaps uh, um, um, maybe a professor like Michael Mann, somebody like that. I was trying to think of whether there would be a place for Steyer in the administration. There are a lot of people in Bernie's movement who have been supporting him, okay, and working with him, who he knows very well and who he trusts, and he's probably going to place them in his the top spots in the cabinet. Steyer would probably want a high level spot, and I'm trying to think about where he might fit in, and it's hard for me to think about that because there are so many people who Bernie would be able to appoint, who, from Bernie's point of view, might be better qualified. But yes, I get an honest vibe from him. New comments. Divorce says, I think he would be good at the logistics of getting people employed. It seems like that's the kind of thing a big company owner would be good at. I don't think he was a large company owner. I think Steyer has been a hedge funder and has made his money in finance. I think that's how he primarily made his money. I don't know how many people he's ever supervised, but the point is, the way the federal job guarantee works is that it's a distributed program. It's a localized program. It's federally funded, but it's locally constituted, okay, in each of the local areas, and there are boards of stakeholders in those areas. Okay, at the federal level, there are people who are, who do the administration of the program, but they're not the people who are going to invent and specify the jobs. And they're not the people who are going to be handling the logistics of actually getting people employed. Those people are going to be on the local level. And I think that Steyer wants something that is national in scope. Kathy says, I've been impressed by Steyer. I think he's very genuine. Yeah, I think we all have that opinion. Okay, so I would never make fun of him. If he has seemed like someone, who's basically been trying to get noticed by Bernie, I think that's true. That's the sort of opinion, okay, I had, but it seems to me that his desire to be noticed by Bernie is a desire to help and to be part of the change that he thinks that Bernie is going to bring. And I think he would be a very good person to help. In fact, I think he probably would have been much more welcome in the campaign, okay, if he wasn't a billionaire, but just a person who was joining the campaign. He has a lot to offer as a person, I think. And Daniel Dunavant says an imperialist is probably talking about Teddy Roosevelt. Okay, I'm at the end of the comments, and I'm more than 2 hours and 10 minutes into this live stream, and I didn't intend to put anywhere near to have a live stream anywhere near as long as this. So I'm going to call it a night. I'll be on again in the 9 o'clock hour tomorrow. I promise you a much shorter live stream then. I promise. Swear on a stack of Bibles. Bonnie says, you don't have any. Yeah, well, what are you going to do? It's an expression. Steve says, I think Steyer should start at the congressional level and help Bernie that way. Oh, you mean that Steyer should run for Congress? That's, I think, a very good thought. I think that Steyer might be a fine candidate for the Senate in California, as a matter of fact. He could run as a progressive in California on a Bernie platform. He'd probably be very good at that. But maybe he should start at the House level. Yes, Steve, you may very well be right. Okay, I'm going to say good night now. Have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.